In 1930s Europe, the murder of women and children could not be imagined, let alone anticipated. Let me tell you something. Before World War II, about 85% of all casualties in wars were soldiers. Okay, then there was the collateral damages. In World War II, it was 50-50, counting the Holocaust and Soviet Russia. Now, the casualties are between 90 and 95% civilians, and the rest soldiers, military. The turning point was World War II and the Holocaust. It was a turning point. The Holocaust was a turning point in the history of genocide because it had never been state-sponsored. The Holocaust is not unique because of the target or even the number, but because it was state-sponsored. Never before had genocide been state-sponsored. Maybe church-sponsored, but never state-sponsored. And it still isn't. It was a turning point in the history of anti-Semitism and a turning point in the history of women. Nazi ideology was rooted in patriarchy, as I said, as well as anti-Semitism. The final solution focused in on the annihilation of Jewish women, not only because they were Jews, but also because they were women, and as women, they were the perpetuators of the future generations of Jews. Now that's kind of different. In other wars, when you conquered the men, quote unquote, conquered, you took the women as booty. This was a time, either you protected the women, decade, maybe a century ago, in Africa, it was normal to protect women and children. Now they first murder them, but it was normal to protect them. And in European Western history, it was normal to take the women as booty, not in the Holocaust. The Holocaust changed what we know about behavior, military and otherwise. To help clarify the ways in which women were targeted, we're examining the similarities and the differences. And we'll notice how they were remembered and transmitted. Men and women suffered different horrors, but the same hell. Both men's and women's memoirs are usually organized the same way, beginning with a short section on pre-Nazi days within the family, then the imposition of Nazi restrictions like wearing curfews and wearing the star is here, ghettoization, deportation to the camps, and finally, if they were lucky, liberation. The structure of these memoirs by men and women parallels the structure of Nazi practice: identification, isolation, annihilation, through work and starvation, the consequent diseases from starvation, and outright murder. I don't like to say Jews were killed. Jews were murdered. Killed is too neutral a term, and too many people just say Jews died. They were murdered. In published memoirs, both men and women usually understate their experiences rather than overstate them. They also sentimentalize a little bit of those pre-Nazi years. They remembered rather gently, and probably the experience was not nearly as gentle as we're told, but people deserve that freedom to do that. Virtually all memoirs deal with hunger. Now, if you've done the reading that I had sent, you know that I deal a lot with food and hunger and so on. Hunger was ubiquitous. Time was measured by hunger. One survivor wrote, "We have a calendar in Birkenau. It is hunger. Morning is hunger. Afternoon is hunger. Evening is hunger." For those interned in labor and concentration camps, quote goes on, existence in the camps was a constant state of humiliation, degradation, hunger, overcrowding, cold, pain, terror, lack of sleep, beatings, infestation with fleas and lice, the threat of death, and the knowledge that family, friends, and fellow Jews were being exterminated. There are differences that we have to look at because Women were regarded and treated differently by the Nazis, and they were separated by sex in the camps. Before we go on, in Berlin, in Germany, in 1935, just want to not forget this one, to tell you this. The most popular book that Jewish families had in their homes was the New York City Telephone Directory. They wanted to get out. And you could get out if you had enough money, and so on. But you had to have a sponsor. And so they looked for last names that echoed theirs, that were the same. And then they would write letters and hope that it would maybe a distant relative or something. But Marian Kaplan, in one of her books, talks about the way the New York City telephone book was like a gold, because it was your ticket out. And women were the ones who were doing the writing. The men had, those who could, had left. Not necessarily to New York, but maybe to even France, just trying to get out of Germany. So you had the women carrying the roles that the men hadn't been carrying. That wasn't easy. In the books written by men seem reluctant, they're more reluctant than women to describe the details of the humiliation. Men don't dwell on that shame and that humiliation. Women describe it, even when they describe it like third person and distantly and almost objectively. Women do that much more than men do. Women are more reticent to describe sexual issues than women, although women are cautious and circumspect about describing sexuality. You want to know about it, but very seldom will you have an outright first-person description of anything to do with sex. It'll be the woman writing about what she observed. You can make your own inferences, but that's the norm for it. It's only recent that some people, some women are saying, this happened to me very, very recently, maybe in the last 10 years. And sexuality is not conspicuous in the memoirs because hunger mitigated the sexual instinct, but neither is it absent. Okay, basically their differences were different as a result of differences in biology and socialization. Let me put that up, okay? These are the two issues, more so than religious observance or where they came from or place in the family or anything else. Biology and socialization were the two factors that influenced the differences in the way men and women were treated and how they coped. Okay. All right. In the pre-war period, society in Europe, and here too, was more